Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast of the Santa Fe New Mexican about interesting people and places of northern New Mexico. I'm Inez Russell Gomez, and this week we are discussing perhaps the most important issue in our state, water. With us to help us understand more about this precious resource are Tanya Trujillo, Deputy State Engineer, and Interstate Stream Commission Director Hannah Riseley-White. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
First thing, why don't each of you describe your agency and what it does and what you do there? I know a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with how the state manages water. Hannah, why don't you go first and then we'll hear from Tanya.
Great, thank you, Inez. So I work at the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. We're a state agency that works incredibly closely with the Office of the State Engineer. I'll let Tanya Trujillo talk a little bit about what they do there. Interstate Stream Commission is not a regulator, so we don't administer water rights. We are tasked largely by statute with supporting New Mexico in our compliance with interstate compacts. So those are the agreements between New Mexico and our neighboring states about how water in our river system is shared. New Mexico is a party to 8 different interstate compacts, so our office does a lot of work to help support both accounting under those compacts on how that water is apportioned, but also management actions to support us in complying with that water sharing that occurs between the states. Interstate Stream Commission also has an acequia bureau that funds infrastructure projects in New Mexico's acequias and community ditches. We do a lot of work related to compliance with federal environmental regulations, including the Endangered Species Act. And last, and one thing I'm super excited to talk with you more about today is water planning. Interstate Stream Commission is tasked by statute also with both state and regional water planning. And in the 2023 legislative session, the new Water Security Planning Act was passed unanimously by the legislature. And we're very much actively working to implement that and solicit input from the public and our tribes, pueblos, and nations across the state and what the future of regional water planning will look like for New Mexico.
Okay. And we'll come back to that because that really is an important issue because we can't really find more water, but we can use what we have better probably. And Tanya, let's talk about the Office of the State Engineer. I think it's one of those really, really important agencies that a lot of people maybe don't know exists. Tell us what it does and why it's so important.
The Office of the State Engineer is tasked by the legislature to manage and regulate water use in the state. And that's both surface water uses throughout the state and groundwater uses. And New Mexico has a robust series of laws that tell us how to do that. And we are working on a daily basis with the water users and with the other state agencies on how to ensure that we do have a solid system of management and regulation in place. And so we have lots of different things we could talk about today. Thanks.
No, definitely. One of the things I understand, and maybe this is incorrect, so Tanya, maybe you can help me. The state engineer also helps it doesn't adjudicate, but it helps people figure out who gets what water. And New Mexico is really complicated because we have American laws, we have indigenous water rights that predate everybody, and then we have whatever rights were guaranteed under Spanish land grants, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, all of those things. Is it right to say we're more complicated than most places?
Well, I think you're accurate in saying we have a responsibility to try to determine who has what water rights, and that's definitely part of our job here. And we do have a pretty complex system of water management here in New Mexico. So some rights do date back to time immemorial for some of our Pueblo and tribal water rights. And then we have rights that stem back to Spanish law as well. So we have a lot of different layers here, which makes us so interesting.
Yeah, I like that word. Interesting covers a lot of damage. I just remember when my parents got some new neighbors up in Mora from Texas, that they could not understand why the little stream, they had a little acequia, and it flows through their property, and he could never get why he didn't get to keep some of that water, and they hadn't checked that water rights went with their property. And it was kind of a lesson for everybody to be really diligent when you buy land. So, Hannah, going back to the Interstate Stream Commission, let's talk about the water planning that you guys are doing right now and who you're meeting with around the state to figure out kind of what New Mexico needs to do to be water secure.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the Water Security Planning Act passed unanimously in the 2023 legislative session. It was essentially a rewrite of New Mexico's regional water planning statute. The original statute was passed in 1987 and was largely considered to have served its purpose. One of the things that State Engineer Mike Hammond, who just retired, did is he convened in 2022 a water policy and infrastructure task force. That task force came up with a robust slate of recommendations to support New Mexico, primarily in confronting the challenges associated with climate change and increasing water scarcity. One of the recommendations of that task force was to revisit our regional water planning statute, and then that occurred, which is exciting. So Interstate Stream Commission is currently in the thick of implementing this statute, and we're really trying to do it with as much public input as possible. The previous statute and the planning process under that statute was in place for several decades, and so we're wanting to be very thoughtful in how we implement this new statute. Really get as much input as possible so that we get it right in supporting communities across the state in confronting, the increasing challenges of water scarcity and fire and post-fire flooding, which is something we've just seen in the last few weeks in New Mexico. And basically where we're at in the process right now is beginning in April, we started holding in-person open house events across the state. We still have 2 more rounds of those, including culminating with a final open house in Albuquerque on August 7th. All of the information related to those events is on our website, which is mainstreamnm.org. So again, that's mainstreamnm.org. Those open house events are intended to collect input from the public about what sort of the future planning process looks like, who needs to be involved, when and how, and also how the regions themselves will be delineated. So one of the things that the statute did is it tasked us with revisiting the actual delineation of the planning regions themselves. So we're collecting a ton of input. All of the opportunities to comment at those in-person open houses are also online on that same website, mainstreamnm.org. That website will be live through August 18th. And we're really hoping that as many people as possible check that out, weigh in on what they think is critical for New Mexico to address, how this new regional water planning process can be beneficial and impactful for communities across the state. Coming out of that process, we'll capture all of that input in a draft set of policy guidance documents, so rules and guidelines later this fall. Those will also be available for public comment, and then we'll go through an official rule promulgation process late this year or early next year, hoping to pin down sort of what that planning framework looks like by next year so that we can then start working with communities across the state in water planning activities and then implementing solutions. And there's a few important things that statute did, but I'll just break now and see if that's what you were looking for in terms of an update for us.
No, that works perfectly, and we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with some more Conversations Different.
Thanks, Inez. This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez. Great local content is only possible with a talented staff dedicated to bringing you the best local content possible. For that staff to do its work, we need your support by subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And if not, there's never been a better time to subscribe. In addition to our home-delivered newspaper that comes with full digital access, we also provide digital-only subscriptions for SantaFeNewMexican.com. We'll also be releasing more online-only audio and video programming moving forward. The Santa Fe New Mexican has been here for nearly 175 years, and we want to continue being your source for local news and information. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/subscribe or call us at 505-986-3010. Thank you.
It's a new day in New Mexico, and the doors to boundless opportunity are open as tens of thousands of New Mexicans reach higher to pursue a dream, broaden their horizons, and retrain for a better job. With the New Mexico Lottery and Opportunity Scholarships, you could build yourself a better future anywhere in the state. You put in the hard work, we'll help with the costs. For eligibility details, visit reachhighernm.com.
We are back with Conversations Different, discussing water. And we just heard from Hannah Riseley-White about what's going on in terms of planning across the state. Tanya, let's talk a little bit about the responsibility in the state engineer's office. How do you deal with the fact that the river goes dry sometimes, those kinds of things? Is there anything that you guys do from your perspective when it comes to who's using what water, or is it just it's drying up and that's all we can do?
Well, we at the State Engineer Office work very closely with our partners at the Interstate Stream Commission and with all of the water users in the state to try to manage the water as carefully as possible. And it's true in the Rio Grande during some years when we see insufficient precipitation in particular, that some of the drying will occur. Our efforts really center upon trying to have as much coordination as possible among all of the water users in the basin. And this starts with partners in the federal government who operate some of the federal reservoirs in the system, through the cities and the towns and the irrigation districts that run up and down the valley. But I definitely would like to hear from Hannah as well, because the Interstate Stream Commission is one of the primary entities that keeps track of the water flows in different parts of the river.
Okay. Hannah, chime in, because I know that's really important, because it's not just the users, but there's also some endangered species that get affected if the rivers go dry, kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya and Inez. Certainly, we are, collaborative partners in many of our river basins in New Mexico, supporting initiatives to ensure flows for species and ecosystem purposes. I guess I would say, one of the things that's interesting about New Mexico is we have and have had historically river systems that are ephemeral, or that, have certain times of year where river systems naturally run or don't run. We have lots of arroyos in New Mexico, for example. But we certainly are seeing increasing scarcity. And as we see temperatures rise, there's somewhat some uncertainty as to what's going to happen in the climate projections related to precipitation. But all of the signs point to us having increasing temperatures, and that will result in increased water loss from our landscapes and increasing drying in our rivers. One of the really important and critical tools that we have at the state of New Mexico is called the Strategic Water Reserve. It's a program that Interstate Stream Commission administers, whereby the state is able to acquire water to support stream flow, both for species purposes and compact purposes. It's a very valuable tool, and we've been utilizing it in river basins across the state. A very new and exciting partnership is underway on the San Juan River with the Hickory Apache Nation and the Nature Conservancy, a unique partnership by which we're able to lease water from the Hickory Apache Nation to support stream flows in the San Juan for species purposes. But that's something that we are very actively engaged in across the state.
Oh, that is fascinating. And the ephemeral water is really important because the Supreme Court basically said those waters don't get protection. And in New Mexico, so much of our water comes and goes that we have a lot of places, I guess, where people can pollute if they want to, it seems like. Is that something you guys are worried about, Hannah or Tanya?
I mean, I guess I would say, we're Interstate Stream Commission, just like we're working closely with the Office of the State Engineer, we also work really closely with our partners at New Mexico Environment Department. One of the things that I see as a real benefit coming out of that task force that I mentioned earlier is a real enhanced effort to coordinate across the natural resource agencies, and particularly between the water quantity folks, like at our shop, mine and Tanya's, and the water quality folks at NMED. There's a big effort underway right now to address the challenges that you're flagging, and we're very much supportive of our colleagues there at New Mexico Environment Department and supporting protecting New Mexico's waters.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's one of those things that perhaps the bright side is that it will have the state maybe pass some new laws or invest in enforcement in a way that we haven't done before, because there were federal laws that would protect us that aren't really there anymore.
In a little bit, this is a great opportunity to highlight the governor's 50-year water action plan that she released in January, and it contains elements that address exactly this subject and concentrate on the need to make sure that New Mexico will have a robust program to evaluate impacts from a water quality perspective on our waters. And it's exactly as you mentioned, because the federal protections are not going to be there for us to rely on.
That's good to note, Tanya. Thank you. I was thinking about, this is such a complicated subject, obviously, because one of the things you're talking about is there's the management between the basins all in the state, but then we have to make sure we get our water from Colorado. We have to make sure that the water we're supposed to send to Texas gets there. And we just had a Supreme Court decision that said the deal we had made with Texas in terms of what we owe them isn't going to be good enough. How long do you think we have to work out what we're going to owe them, Tanya, and figure out, are we going to have enough water in New Mexico because we're in deficit? This seems like a little scary for us.
Well, this is an issue that we're thinking about on a daily basis, and we are taking significant actions right now to make sure that we can come into compliance with our compact obligations and meet the water supply needs of our citizens here in New Mexico. And again, I'm going to pull it over to Hannah because her programs are doing exactly that.
All right. Come on, Hannah.
Thanks, Tanya. I think, we've all spoken in this discussion about the challenges that we're facing. And I think that, despite the recent U.S. Supreme Court opinion, we see that there's lots of work needed, particularly in the Lower Rio Grande. The state of New Mexico, the state legislature, has invested heavily in that effort, and that funding is super critical to us. We also recently received $60 million in federal IRA money, Inflation Reduction Act funding, for the Lower Rio Grande specifically. We're working very actively with stakeholders in the Lower Rio Grande and with our partners at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to address the challenges in the Lower Rio Grande, and we're going to continue moving that effort forward despite the recent decision.
All right. Well, that's good news. And we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with some more Conversations Different.
My name is Maria Jose Rodriguez Cadiz, and I am the Executive Director with Solace Sexual Assault Services. Our mission is to prevent sexual violence and empower survivors of sexual violence through restoring dignity, strength, and resiliency. For almost 51 years, Solace has reduced the impact of sexual violence. We do it by focusing on human rights, social justice, hope, and dignity. We believe survivors are experts in their own experiences and acknowledge that empowering them is crucial to their healing. Our advocacy, forensic interviewing, and therapy services are centered to their needs. Our sexual violence prevention programs in schools and community is just as important. Please check our website at findsolace.org. And if in need, you can call our 24/7 hotline, which is 800-721-7273. Your support is crucial to the lives of survivors. Thank you. Gracias.
We are back again with Conversations Different, talking to Tanya Trujillo from the Office of the State Engineer and Hannah Riseley-White with the Interstate Stream Commission. And Hannah, let's go back to the planning that you guys are doing. What is like a concrete thing that comes out of such a plan? Is it like shoring up a dam in some city? Is it doing water restoration or, habitat restoration so that the water is better? Tell me some actual projects that might come out of it. Or is it more just how you are using the water in certain areas?
Thanks, Inez. Honestly, it could be all of the above. It sort of depends on the needs of the specific region. One of the things that the new statute does that we're excited about is it really attempts to link the planning process more fully to implementation. And that includes requiring that the regions prioritize recommendations for funding. And that could be for, we say, projects, policies, or programs. So it could be, an actual water infrastructure facility, like a dam or reducing depletions through some sort of infrastructure that, pipes water, etc. Or it could also be a program that promotes conservation efforts. And so the planning process, ideally, the regions will be crafting recommendations and then prioritizing them for state funding. And that's something that the legislature has been excited about because it helps us figure out at a state level how to prioritize state funding and then use that state funding to leverage federal funding for those projects. But it will vary widely across the state based on the needs of local communities.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it's good because if you prioritize, then you don't have a situation where important legislators maybe can get money for a project that's not as important as another one just because they're more powerful. So you hopefully do what's necessary first.
Absolutely. And I'd like to highlight one of the things that the Act did also was to call on Interstate Stream Commission to work with the Indian Affairs Department to convene a Water Security Tribal Advisory Council. We're really excited about that initiative. We have lots of Indian water rights settlements underway in Tanya's shop, and that's something that we support as well. But this will be an opportunity for us to ensure that New Mexico's distinct tribal interests and that special sovereign to sovereign relationship is represented in the future planning process. And so that's something that's I wanted to just highlight as well.
No, that's really, really important. And I know with the settlement up in Taos and the settlement in, north of Santa Fe and Nambe, we're hopefully kind of putting some of that to rest so people know that they will have water and not have to worry about a prior call coming along or something. So that's really important. Tanya, going back to your office, the state engineer under statute has been an engineer, the person who's the director of that office. Is that something that is historical, or is it something that we need to have today? Could a water rights attorney or could a biologist or somebody who knows about rivers be a good state engineer? What's your feeling and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, under statute, the state engineer shall be somebody who is a registered professional engineer. So until and unless the statute changes, that's what the guidelines are. And it's an appointed position, so the governor appoints that person, and then it's subject to confirmation by the Senate.
Right. But what I'm asking is, do you think the requirements of the job still necessitate an engineer? And maybe you don't want to give an opinion because it's a statute and they're going to either change it or not. But I'm just wondering, because at one time, a lot of the office was, helping build stuff. Is that still as important, or is it more of a management and a conservation position and an adjudication to some degree?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I can't opine on the, nature of the statute, but I would say that our work is very broad. And as we started out with, we have several different layers of administrative work that we do. We have a lot of coordination with our other sister agencies, and the engineering components are part of that work, and other parts of it don't involve that. So there's a wide variety of work that we do across the board.
Okay, that makes sense. Thinking about planning, one of the things I have, different people that write letters or call and, are always worried about water. And one of the things they talk about is that again, there's not more water out there. Everyone's always talking about I'm buying water rights, but there's a finite supply. The Colorado River is over allocated supposedly. Hannah, is part of what you're doing going to focus on a lot more conservation and maybe things that New Mexico's not doing, like, catching water, building more, permeable parking lots, all the things that you can do to do a better job with the water we have? Is that part of the future?
Yeah, I think, given the challenges that we're seeing looking into the future, it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach. So we're going to have to implement a full sort of slate of solutions, including identifying alternative supplies and improving infrastructure. And there is no doubt that conservation is going to need to be a part of that puzzle. So, I think that one of the things that our planning shop likes to think about is not so much looking at water as like a supply and demand framework, but more in terms of how are we balancing our water use with the available supply, and how are we getting creative in how we do that. And I think that's kind of the core question that we and many of our neighboring states in the West are facing. How do we balance what we use with what's available?
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, you've read about some of those cities, and I think Arizona has one of them where they can't have any new hookups because they have no more water. And I don't know if we're close to that point yet here, but it's a really frightening kind of thing, because if you can't grow, everything gets more expensive. So even if you don't want to grow a lot, you want to be able to grow a little.
And I could just jump in again, because this is a great opportunity to highlight the elements in the governor's 50-year water action plan, because we have three main areas of concentration. The first one is water conservation, and recognizing the need to have conservation efforts in place for municipalities and in rural systems, but also in the agricultural sector.
Right.
And I would note the first element of the plan is to concentrate on water education. And that's something that will benefit all of our communities across the board.
Oh.
But then the second big area of work that the plan concentrates on is development of new water supplies. So recognizing that we may need to be looking for new supplies of water that will ensure we do have secure sources for the future. And then the third general area is water quality protection and watershed protection, because that's definitely part of the mix. If we have to make sure that the water we do have available is clean and safe for our human populations and for the natural environment as well.
Wow. So that covers an awful lot of ground. And the point, I guess, going forward is to have the will, the money, and the planning capacity to do all the things we need to do.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I like that. And on that note, we have come to the end of our time. And I really appreciate, your guys' knowledge and experience, and really helping people understand that they can have a say in how we plan for our water use. So we'll let people know about that, and we thank you. And this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week.